that we practice again how this is gonna go. Also for midterm 2, you're gonna have a minute. Once it's over, I'll give you 15 seconds just in all of them in case you miss something and you want to complete all that. And in midterm 2, you're not gonna have these like not going back. You're gonna probably have some paper or something so that you can actually go and fix anything once you look at the slides all over. Okay, so in slide 1, we have, I mean, this can be confusing because it looks like an older leaf, but I want it kind of like a close-up of it's fully all yellow. And so all yellow, that gives you nitrogen or sulfur deficiency. And then here, hopefully you can see, also we can maybe figure out a way in which everybody's going to be closer that day. And so these could be younger leaves here. So that tells you that the element cannot be moved through the phloem because the younger leaves have the symptom, and then that tells you if it's nitrogen or sulfur. In this case, it will be sulfur deficiency. In slide 2, there's going to be potassium deficiency. So the key is the yellowing of the tips. Whenever you see the tips that are full yellow, that's going to tell you it's potassium. This is where you probably, once you identify potassium, this is what your memory kind of has to remember if potassium, because it doesn't really have counterpart, is going to be immobile or not. It is. It can be mobilized. So again, it can be hard to see from this picture, but potassium is going to be in all of this. So this is a horrible picture, I know. So we actually have nitrogen deficiency twice. I promise I'll have better pictures because this is just bad, which you can see it's all fully yellow. And I guess here I put it into perspective into older leaves are the ones with yellow, the younger leaves are not. We'll have better pictures, different pictures for the exam. So overall leaves are pale, and it's nitrogen because it's the older leaves, like so. Calcium deficiency, again, calcium is one of those that is kind of easy to spot because of the misshapen leaves. There's no counterpart, so calcium cannot be moved. It's through the phloem, cannot be translocated, so younger leaves in this case are the ones with that defect. 5 is going to be iron deficiency, so the intervenial chlorosis, hard to see here, but the veins are all green. And then here you can see, it's got the tips, so some oil in the veins. And then it's going to be in younger leaves. This person is grabbing the youngest leaves of the plant, and so you can see. Slide 6 is purple phosphorus. So hopefully you remember that key everywhere. So purple phosphorus, and then again, as I said, it can also be nitrogen. Some corn plants do this just because they like doing that without being fine. So just letting you know, some corn plants produce enough anthocyanins that in the leaves that a perfectly healthy plant will look purple. So don't just assume it has a deficiency. But if I show you purple, we agree it's going to be phosphorus. And so purple discoloration, all the leaves. So we can translocate it. 7 is magnesium, again intervenient chlorosis, but now you have the older leaves here. So that's what makes it magnesium and not iron. And the last one is nitrogen, all leaves fully yellow, and the single older leaves here, being yellow. So nitrogen. Okay? Good. So you're going to have these slides on the previous slides again to practice. This is going to be 20% of midterm 2. Make sure you have this flow. Okay, so now that we're talking about minerals and nutrients and all of that, we briefly talked about fertilizers last class. And we talked about how most soils are usually given in 3 elements. And those 3 elements are the ones that you find in our regular, like very traditional fertilizer. And this is going to be NPK, so these values is going to be the proportion. Again, if your soil is efficient with something else, you can find fertilizers for that. You have all the options. You have, organic matter, all of that. But the traditional one you're gonna find with the three numbers is nitrogen. So we reviewed what the importance of nitrogen, the importance of phosphorus, and the importance of potassium. Hopefully, you remember this. And one of the things we're going to start talking about today is the carbon-nitrogen balance. So the most limiting factor for plant growth, for the most part, is going to be nitrogen. Remember we said how half of the energy spent growing plants is some either application or delivery of something of nitrogen. So plants tend to have carbon is not an issue for them. It's out there. They open stomach, they have carbon. So it's going to be a balance of they can get enough carbon from the atmosphere, even with enough water. But if you don't give them enough nitrogen, so nitrogen is going to be from the roots up and carbon from the leaves down, everywhere. So it's going to be a balance of if a plant can have enough water, will have probably enough carbon, but if you don't give it enough nitrogen, that is still going to limit plant growth because you need carbon and nitrogen balance, for amino acids and for everything. So we're going to start talking about that. Also, an important thing is the availability of those nutrients. So you can give this plant all of the nutrients that you want. You can fertilize that soil as much as you want. But clearly pH is important for these nutrients to be available for the plant. So what can you tell me about availability of nutrients and pH?
So the majority of them are mostly available, like slightly acidic pHs.
Yeah, so basically you have under acidic conditions, for the most part, again generalizing, the major nutrients are not going to be covered if it's really acidic. Ideally you have some close to neutral, and then if your soil has a very high pH, then it's the trace elements, the ones that are going to be deficient for the most part. But as Sam was saying, plants basically prefer slightly acidic pH. So as you can see, all of these micronutrients are still somewhat available. So you don't want to go too low because these micronutrients are going to be here. Definitely alkaline conditions are not. So slightly acidic is going to be where most plants want to go. So if you need to adjust the pH of the soil, what would you do? What, either from the book or what do people do? What do you need to do something to the soil? What options do you have?
Add something to it.
Sorry?
Add something to it.
Add what? Sorry?
Something like nutrients.
Oh yeah, something, but what is that something? Yeah, so you can add things to the soil, okay? Sometimes it's not going to be necessarily thinking of the plant uptaking it, but think about it more, what can I add to the soil to adjust the pH so more things become available in turn by adjusting the pH?
Would it be like cations?
Yes. So depending on, so cations and also, so why do you think cations would be a good option?
Well, if you're adding Or would it be anions? Because if you're adding like a negative charge to a positive, you're taking acidity out, or do you want it to be more acidic? Is it like that type of reaction?
I mean, it's kind of that type of interaction. So more than precisely one charge is elements but you're in the right track in the sense, elements that that they have the capability of dissociating or associating with something. So either dissociating and releasing H or associating and stealing some of that H and then, adjusting those hydrogen ions and adjusting pH. So I don't know if you've heard of lime. This is something that people add to the soil a lot. Also ashes, if you have to use ashes, that's going to be like a more organic way of doing this. So that releases a lot of carbonates, and that basically can increase the salt pH. So again, some your lows, if you see lime, that's what is there if you need to increase the pH of your soil. You need to decrease the pH of your soil because it's too high. Then you have things that are sulfurs or aluminum. And so pretty much it says salt acidifier. And so some of them will have, different options will be, in these cases, ammonium, because ammonium, when it dissociates, is going to release hydrogen, as we saw the previous time. Sulfur, eventually, if it associates with bacteria, is going to give you sulfuric acid, or very low sulfuric acid, and in turn, lower the pH. So sulfurs will decrease pH, and limes will increase the pH of your soil. What is charged soil particles, and why is that important? Yes.
If they didn't have the charges, they'd be more easily swept away by water and they wouldn't be available for the plants to actually get.
To get what?
The nutrients that are more positively charged.
Yeah. So they are important because the soil particles we're thinking of, well, inert if it is like clay and sand. But remember, soil also has organic, right? Organic matter. So in general, soil, those individual particles, organic or inorganic, are going to be overall negatively charged. They are going to be rich. So clay is rich in negative charges. Organic matter, has a lot of carboxylic acids, phenolic acids. They dissociate, become, COO minus acidic. So soil overall tends to be negatively charged. Okay? And so it's important because based on those charges, and if the soil particles are negatively charged, it's more likely they will retain and associate with cations with positively charged minerals, while the other negative charges are more likely to just, associate with water and just flow with water stays, they stay, water goes, they go. And so that is what is known as cation exchange capacity. So again, the overall charge of individual soil particles is going to be, the surface is going to be negatively charged. So many things like potassium, calcium, magnesium, ammonium is not here. I think I have it. Yes, I have it here. Ammonium. All of those are going to remain associated with soil particles. To what extent? The more negative charges the soil particle has, that's why organic matter also is so important. The more negative charges there are, the more likely they are going to be associated, and it's kind of like a slow release as the plant needs it, as the plant absorbs it, it is going to start releasing these particles. What about like nitrogen and phosphate? And all those the things that are negatively charged.
They get stuck in the water around the soils, but they end up leaving and going into the water flow.
Yeah, so they cannot associate with the particles, so they'll stay in the water and then are kind of at the mercy of what water does. Okay? If it rains a lot, if it just turns into groundwater, whatever happens, the nutrients will go with the water. And there's very little control in the soil for what is negatively charged minerals. So they stay in the salt solution, and phosphate is very interesting because phosphate has the ability to associate more than with the soil with some of the cations that are already associated with the soil, but it depends a lot on the pH. So we're going to be talking a lot about phosphate eventually because pH is crucial for phosphate availability. First of all, based on what we talked about, what would be soluble nutrients? What would be an example of something that is soluble? Talking about soil, what would be soluble?
Like I mentioned.
Like a nitrate, right? Something that is in the solution, that's soluble. So negatively charged things that are not associated. How do soluble nutrients move from the soil? Like far away from the soil, closer to the root.
They just follow the pressure gradient with water and then eventually end up in the root.
Yeah, so they move basically, go back to the pressure gradient or bulk flow. Right? If they are dissolved in the water, how does water move from far away in the root to closer to the root by bulk flow? It's the same kind of driver because they are dissolved in the water, so they are at mercy of what the water is doing. Okay. What about insoluble nutrients? So the things that are associated with the soil, how do they move with the soil? Yes.
What would be the relationship between microbial plant that are soiled with the plant?
Well, yeah, yes, but some plants don't have mycorrhizae and they can still. It's better if they do, definitely. And we're going to talk about mycorrhizae at the end of the class. But just soil alone, only soil. How does it move? How do they move? How do you call the movement of particles from high concentration to low concentration? Diffusion. So they move by diffusion. They are just in soil. They are not associated with the water. And it's just the concentration. Higher to lower, as the plant absorbs some of them, it's going to lower the concentration of whatever nutrient that is. And they are going to move out that way. Because they are not associated with water, they are associated with the soil. Okay? So they move by diffusion. So one of the things is that water, we talked about water and now talking about nutrients, they require an extensive root system, and we know that, we've seen that. But what we don't see sometimes is just the root system, right? Whenever we're talking agriculture, just our house plants, we care about what we're looking at, not what is underneath. And if you take a plant that you had for a couple of months even, or years, you're gonna see that it's almost no soil, it's all just this extensive root system just around it. So when we think about annual crop plants, they grow about 2 meters in depth and extend about 1 meter, just roots, every year. An established orchard, and this is, like, I don't know, probably like apple or something, up to 18 kilometers of roots per tree. So it's much more growth under than what we're actually seeing. Okay, so there is so much associated with what's called the rhizosphere, that is the entire environment happening underneath that we don't pay attention because we're just focused on what we see. But it's this whole world happening down there and growing down there much larger and to a much greater extent than what we see. And we don't really know because we didn't care really until 1960s that people started figuring out how to do this better. So annual production of roots is much higher than shoots. And again, that brings us to the rhizosphere. And then the rhizosphere is all that ecosystem that's happening around the roots. So the nutrients that are around the roots, the microbes that are around the roots, there's basically everything. That's what's called the rhizosphere. We will be talking about the rhizosphere starting with microrhizosphere. Okay, so what can you tell me about this graph? What do you see in this graph?
Root biomass is highest with like moderate amounts of like both of like the nitrogen, cation and anions, not just like one or the other.
Yeah, so one of the things we briefly talked about this last class is that when you give nitrogen, that again is the most limiting factor in plant growth, most limiting nutrient in plant growth, is that you have to give a nitrogen and ammonia, and then it's going to become more clear later on when we talk about exactly why. But also, there is kind of there's a key, and it's moderate. So basically, if you give it too little, clearly there's going to be very little growth, right? We're talking about root growth. If you give it too much, now there's also kind of very little growth. Okay, so let's kind of, why is that? So think about low nutrients and low water. You have a plant that has very few nutrients available and little water. How do you think the root is going to be in that plant? Like if you compare it to a very well water fed plant.
Will it be really long, like stringy?
So why do you think it would be very long?
Because it's growing research for the nutrients.
So yeah, so one of the things is that kind of there's no clear cut here, it depends. So right, if it is low water, sometimes plants tend to just grow like instead of towards the sides down. Oh my god, sorry, I'm just looking at all this hair. Distracting. And so there's all these roots going really, really low. Okay. However, if the nutrients and the water are very limited, like extremely limited, then the root is going to be very small. Why? Because you still need, yes, the carbon that the shoot is providing, and if you have very little nutrients, the root still needs nutrients besides carbon to be produced, right? That's why you can have it, if it's extremely low, the root is going to be very low. Right? It will grow a lot if it has some conditions, just looking for more water, but if it's starving in both senses, the root is going to be very small. Also, when you think about abundant nutrients and abundant water, it also depends what abundant is. If it's like excess nutrients, excess water, to a certain point, okay, you give it a lot, it's gonna grow a lot because it can afford to grow a lot. Now, if the root grows a lot, then the shoot will also grow a lot. But if it has too much, then it's also like at some point, eventually, you don't see the increase anymore because it's like I don't need to look for a lot of stuff. I'm just here, and with the growth that I have, I'm getting everything that I need. So, if it's very, very limited, it's gonna be very little biomass. And then, like the seeking behavior still requires a little bit of both nitrogen sources. So, why? When large amounts of water and nutrients are available. So water, okay, maybe I don't need to grow to find more water, water is coming to me. But why, even if nutrients are available and there's a lot of it, relatively small root systems develop? You have all the nutrients there, why don't you just use it and grow? Yes.
It probably starts to become a battle with the roots where they don't want to uptake too much because it'll become toxic to the plant. So we have like a fine line. If they grow too much, they'll start absorbing when they can handle at one time, and then it will increase toxicity to the plant.
Yeah, so that's the key. Why do you need more than they can handle?
Well,
What could that be?
I mean, like they have to be able to, especially if it's taking in things like metals, you have to be able to counter those. Otherwise, you're going to cause adverse reactions with the plant. So if they don't have the proper balance for whatever they're absorbing, it just depends on what the molecule is that's in the excess. But if they don't have, or the element in excess, if they don't have the counter for that, it'll just build up to a toxic level.
Yeah, so the roots are absorbing everything. And you can absorb it, but if you cannot keep up, the plant is going to get in trouble. And it is all about balance. And like the most simplistic way of looking at it is the carbon-nitrogen balance. So think about carbon, the things that happen above ground, and nitrogen, the things that happen below ground. If you have a lot of all of these nutrients and you absorb them, but you still need carbon, because that carbon is what is going to give you at the end the energy to deal with all of those nutrients that you're acquiring. You need those nutrients either to build molecules, to do something with them. But if you cannot build those sugars and then produce energy using them, then really you're just accumulating a bunch of things. All your energy is going into absorbing, but you have to redistribute some energy into actually the shoots that are the photosynthetic portion that is giving you the access to fixing that carbon and staying alive. Okay. So that is basically the key. If the roots grow too much, then the plant becomes carbon limited, which is odd because the carbon is out there. Why would it be carbon limited? But it can. If it starts uptaking everything that is around, it can become carbon limited. It doesn't have enough time to deal with everything that it is absorbing. And so in that part is when we kind of start thinking about plant symbiosis with other organisms. So there are two very important parts of symbiosis. Two important types of symbiosis. Plant symbiosis with bacteria that fix nitrogen, that's key. And plant symbiosis with organisms that do other things that is not necessarily fixing nitrogen. So for nitrogen fixing is bacteria, for other things such as acquiring phosphate is going to be fungi. So mycorrhizae is the symbiotic interaction, hopefully you recognize this name, between plants and fungi. So what kind of differences can you see between mycorrhizae in the left and in the right? Or similar, let's just say. What is characteristic of mycorrhizal association?
Those are integrated with.
Yeah, so they are all integrated with the root itself. So it's a tricky association because, as you can see here, the fungus is actually in the plant. So that leads us to, I'm sure you've heard about multiple symbiosis examples before, but it is key in the sense the plant usually won't let microorganisms in because you don't want that. But you will allow some of them in if you're getting something out of it, right? So it's very specific, it's going to be very specific type of fungi that do this. And so there are two main types of mycorrhizae. You have endomycorrhizae and ectomycorrhizae. So endomycorrhizae are going to be mostly like inside of the plant, just doing very little exchange. Ectomycorrhizae is the one that really fully extends a lot of the root system, and that's the one we're going to focus on. So I really like this picture because it gives you an idea of how ectomycorrhizae and the hyphae of fungi can extend. So you have the end of the root system here, and all of this part additional is fungi. Okay? So it really extends besides helping the plant mobilize some components and giving the plant some metabolites, basically because it provides enzymes that the plant doesn't have. It itself extends the root system. So it can help the plant, it's move water, but it's mostly acquiring nutrients that are out of reach from the root itself. So when we think about this, it's called arbuscular mycorrhizae because these structures in here are called arbuscules. So this is how the fungus will look like. And if you were looking at the plant cells here in red, and then the fungus in green, it's pretty much those cells are being sacrificed in the sense it's mostly fungus. There's really not much happening there other than the plant letting the fungus grow and feeding the fungus. And so the key is phosphate transporters. So through the semester, we're going to be talking about how phosphate is just unavailable. It's always associated with something. You change the pH, you add the thing a little bit too much, a little bit too not enough, and then phosphate becomes available. So one of the main points of mycorrhizae is they help dissociate that phosphate from soil particles and make it available to the plants. That's the major exchange. The fungus gives the plant phosphate, and the plant gives the fungus carbon. That's like the main balance they have there. Zinc is also involved, and recently scientists think maybe nitrogen, which is a big deal because everybody thought the only way to get nitrogen is from rhizobacteria that interact with legumes mostly, so that's the only association you can have. If scientists can actually figure out that nitrogen can also be associated with fungi, that's going to be a big deal again because rhizobacteria are usually just legumes. So that's the limited part. Yes.
So does the plant's immune system have to be pretty active around it then to keep it contained?
Yeah. So it's a very it is an association that evolved. Actually, I don't think I have this picture here, but there is a picture that I like that is from a fossil from like 50 million years ago, and it's a very, really ancient primitive plant with what looks like arbuscular mycorrhizae. So it's a very ancient association that people speculate was crucial in allowing plants to move to the land. So when you have such an ancient association, it is actually, it's a very intricate system in which the plant basically, so there is something called PAMS, that stands for pathogen-associated molecular parts. Basically things that you as a human recognize that microbes have, and then your immune system just normal things that like cell walls, bacterial cell walls, and your immune system becomes alert. These things don't do that. There's just something that they communicate with the plant, and the plant perceives them, and it's like actually helps it. So it's very specific with this type of fungi. These fungi actually become to play known Chloramycota. Very, very specific. And the plant actually welcomes this type of fungi. So yes, it's a very interesting system that people, every other type of fungi it will repel, but this one doesn't. And some of them are actually obligated symbionts. So it's hard to study them because if you get this on a petri plate, it will die. So it's very hard to study, and that's a question that people spend their entire lives. So yeah, the immune system is not on. There's something about the fungus also saying, knowing I'm not going to grow more because I'm fine in this way. So the fungus is growing outside, right? But it's not growing in, because the fungus kind of also knows if you move beyond this point, you lose your rights to the symbiosis. It's just something that evolved. It's a co-evolution for many, many years. Yes.
So because of its sensitivity to human environments, like it's quick death on a petri dish, how does it transfer to different plants?
Through the soil.
And it can remain in the soil?
Yes. Yeah, so there's a lot of debris that is left in the soil. So actually one of the main things, I think I have it here. So one of the things that happen is agricultural practices affect many of these symbiotic interactions. Because let's say you chop the shoot or whatever, the roots are going to remain sort of alive and sort of so the fungus can degrade some of these organic material to survive for a while by itself. But then what happens is if, for example, plowing and moving the soil too much will perturb these interactions, and if it loses the plant completely, it's going to die. So they remain with debris, with things that are left from season to season. They remain in the soil. The moment you put another plant, it will colonize that type of plant. And I think you can buy mycorrhizal. Again, with organic matter, there are things you can just purchase it, but it is not going to be like when you get a vial, which is pure fungus. So yes, that's one of the things people have explored. Explored, just adding mycorrhizal to help fertilize, but it is just the practices we have perturb them so much that it is just not as easy to do as like rhizobacteria, that they just fully get into the plant. Okay, so I think, oh my God, I forgot about that. So that's it. Combinatorial exams. I will see you.